What I am saying is that I believe that all events in the universe, whether it's an explosion, whether it's a transmission of a light wave, whether it's a life, whether it's a plant, whether it's a cycle, an orbit, all of these things are units. They're not always in all places at all times. Things begin and end. They may begin a long time ago, and they may have many units in them, but they eventually end, and they have a definitive beginning point. Everything in the universe is that way. Since everything in the universe is that way, then the universe, by necessity, has to be finite, because the universe came into being by the Big Bang. All of the individual elements in the universe are finite. All the stars are finite. They all began at a particular time. And all the events that could possibly have created the universe would also be similar. It would be an event that would go from one point to another point. It would have a beginning point. I don't care how far back it is. It could be billions and trillions of years. But you have to come to the conclusion that there is a series of events, and each event has a beginning point. I don't know why certain people choose not to understand this. Everything in the universe, whether it's the projection of a light, whether it's the movement of a particular particle, begins at one point and ends at another point. There is a whole series of events in every particular phase of existence. Each one of these events, broken down, has a beginning point and an end point. There's nothing to escape it. There is nothing that hasn't done anything, because then it doesn't exist in time or space. It's in perpetual, frozen, suspended animation, because it doesn't move. Now, Stephen Hawking, declared as follows. He showed us the mathematics of a parabola. And he said that at a parabola, as it approaches the bottom point, things become imperceptible. And as such, he postulates that in that type of mathematical existence, it is possible for there to be things that don't change but cause change. Now, I just want to say that this is insanity. You cannot cause change without changing yourself unless you are above the things that you are changing. Something that exists in the flow of time but slows down has beginning points. That parabola has a beginning point. You keep adding units backwards in the parabola, and keep adding units forward in the parabola. And even at the bottom of the curve of the parabola, which is what he uses, as imperceptible as the change may be, it is a change. The change has to have a beginning point and an end point. Just very, very simple logic. It's speaking like a child. It's wanting to have it both ways. You can't have change without movement of some kind of involvement, some kind of activity. The activity starts, the activity ends. You breathe in, you breathe out. That's a change. It starts at one point, ends at another point. And I have told you that if you projected time backwards, it would be a series of events, and those events would have beginning points. And therefore, you cannot go back infinitely, because infinitely means without end, without a beginning. And that can't be when you're in a series of events. Therefore, you start at a single point, and the thing that starts the points is something that's outside of the point. It has no point, it's got no volume, it has none of the qualities of time or space. It is both infinite and finite at the same time. We call this entity God. You can call it by any name. You can call it supreme wisdom, supreme will, the force. Don't make a difference what you call it. That's what God is all about. God is the infinite force, the undefined force that can do anything, that knows all the possibilities, has resolved them before we started. That's number one. Number two, My dear friend, heroes of the apostasy, we are given freedom of choice. That's our choice. God may know our choice because God knows the future, because God is not limited by time. And God exists in the future. We're not in the future, so we don't know what we're going to choose later. And therefore, our ability to choose is not caused by God. It's just that God knows what we've chosen. Therefore, omniscience does not force choices. We have our own choice. God gave human beings choices, knowing what those choices would be, because God knows what we have chosen, not because God has forced the choice. And that's a very, very simple philosophical outlook on that thing. Third point I want to tell my atheist friend and friends out there. I know you have bashed the Torah and said that the Torah is a series of documents patched together by priests. First of all, they made a serious attempt using a computer to see if that was true. And the computer discovered, to their shock and dismay, that it was one single hand. All of the so-called documents, the patchwork of documents in the book of Genesis, where this whole document patching theory is, all shows one single hand. The one who told me this is a man by the name of Dr. Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, one of the most respected scholars in the world. You say, well, he's Orthodox. It's irrelevant. He's a scholar. He made this announcement that they discovered, according to the computer, one single hand wrote the book of Genesis. And it's called a Baba-Maisa, an old wives' tale, saying that there's a bunch of patchwork documents. Second thing you have to know is you know no Kabbalah, you know no oral law, and therefore you don't know what you're looking at. Those of us who dabble a little bit in it know the arguments. We also know the counter-arguments, and we know, why do you think we remain religious? Because we're stupid? Because we want to be, starry-eyed? No. We don't want to be starry-eyed. We want the truth. I want the truth. I'm not interested in falsehood. We have read the things. We have read the counter-arguments. We are more convinced of the counter-arguments by the religious people, the religious scholars, than the other so-called scholars. We've read their works. We've seen what they said. A lot of what they said has been thrown out the garbage. I'll give you one example, but this is one example of many. One of the main recurring themes in the Biblical Archaeological Review and in their books about the Bible was the story of Rebecca at the well. Rebecca at the well, Abraham sends Eliezer, his trusted servants, with 10 camels to Haran. I say, this is an anachronism. This cannot be, because the biblical scholars have found and discovered that there were no camels in the time of Avraham, in Abraham's time. Camels were invented by the Egyptians much later. Therefore, the story is made up. Very nice. Except that in a city called Ugarit, they discovered clay tablets with all different kinds of transactions, including camels. And just in case you wanted to know, Ugarit was contemporaneous with Abraham and was destroyed almost immediately afterwards. And so, my dear friend, yes, there were camels, and no, it was not an anachronism. And all of these arguments against the Bible, one by one, has been thrown out the garbage. We're not interested in fooling anyone. We're interested in the truth. We are open. I don't know the answer to everything, but I have, in my lifetime, discovered many answers. And I've discovered that a lot of these people, a lot of these so-called scholars, are a bunch of nitwits and know-nothings. And just because somebody has PhD after the name doesn't mean that they know the truth. I'm willing and I'm open to the arguments. Prove it to me differently. Show me that there is another opinion. I've seen the other opinions. I believe that the Torah was written by God and that every letter is exactly where it's supposed to be.